Okay, so the numbers are still going up. The numbers of attendees are still going up, but we'll make a start. Seem to be fairly static-ish. Right, yeah, let's go. Okay, so morning everybody, and welcome to this the latest of the ASFP webinar, which is regulatory update. We were expecting, we have a limit on these things, and we'd signed up to our limit, so I'm doing this twice today. You get the first version. I hope nobody signed up for both of them, because if you have, you're going to be very bored second time round. So it's our usual webinar format. I'm going to do a presentation. We're on Zoom, so while we're at it, we've got a chat box, we've got a Q&A box, and I'll take questions via the Q&A box as we can. We've got some polls interspersed into the presentation as we go along. So I'm going to do a presentation. Hopefully at the end of it, as time allows, we've got some time for a Q&A, and then some up and close where I do the parish notices and let you know over what a couple of things that are going on within ASFP world. I'm sure that one of the reasons why some of you are listening to me on this one is this webinar has got some CPD accreditation. And if you email info@asfp.org.uk, we will send you a CPD certificate. I will warn you, normally we do these things fairly promptly, but on this particular occasion, Georgina's our events exec, who would normally help us and organize this for us, she's currently on maternity leave and comes back next month. So there may be a few days delay while we wait until George comes back from maternity, and then George will sort these out when she gets back. So info@asfp.org.uk if you want a CPD certificate for sitting here and listening to me on this one. Okay, so we're going to crash on, and I'm going to crash on and look at this one. And just somebody's just sending me a message, which I'm hoping is people can't get into Zoom. I don't know. Oh, it's Honor, if you can hear me in the office, it may be worth just resending the Zoom link out to this. I've got a couple of texts, I've got a couple of WhatsApps from people who say they can't get in. Okay, right. So our standard agenda for this, we're going to talk a bit about the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Act and the legislation that's come out from post-Grenfell, how that's going, where that's up to, and the future developments, especially regarding the regulator and the gateways. A little bit on the construction products regulator, which feeds us into the new bit that some of you won't necessarily have seen, which is the stuff on the Morel report. And then we'll talk a bit about competence and the ongoing developments we've been doing in ASFP on competence framework. And at the very end, we'll touch briefly on CCPI. And to that end, that takes me to the first of the poll questions. And the poll questions should hopefully have appeared. If you're on a PC or whatever, the poll question will have appeared in front of you. You may not be able to see the poll questions if you are on a mobile phone. So please, if you could have a look at that and tell me what's your involvement in passive fire, what do you do, and we'll have a look at that. And if that question doesn't deal with your particular interest, stick me something in the chat box. So again, we've got a fairly broad spread of people, architects, designers, specifiers, manufacturers, the biggest group being the fire risk assessors. Excellent. Well, you're all very welcome, and we shall sorry, you're quite distributors. I need to put right I need to put some, I'll add that to my list for next time. Okay, so obviously post Grenfell, we talk about the things that the regulations that have impacted on us. Building Safety Act and Fire Safety Act are the main two. The Fire Safety England regulations was bits and pieces, with bits and pieces that are designed to implement the changes that the Fire Safety Act was meant to bring about. And actually that Fire Safety England the Fire Safety Act stuff, having passed into law, was enacted through the fire safety regulations, which came live in January this year. It does a number of things. It brings flat front doors and external walls into the scope of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, and we're happy with that. We know that the industry response group is still working to define competency for fire risk assessors, and that there may be a supply of issues with supply of adequately trained fire risk assessors capable of assessing external walls, and they've got a set of rules they can work to. PAS 9980 was published by BSI to give them that sort of, to help with that, and there is a fire risk assessment prioritization tool published by government along with the National Fire Chiefs Council and the Fire Sector Federation to help with all that work. So we've got that brings about an increase in the requirements for multiple dwellings, large multiple occupation dwellings, and that's already been said. That's went live in January this year. The biggest piece of legislation, obviously, is the Building Safety Act, which fell over the line when it got royal assent on the 28th of April last year. The final text of it was published in May of last year, and it's meant to be enabling legislation to implement all 53 of Dame Judith Hackett's recommendations. There's a couple of bits and pieces we know that aren't necessarily in there. The Dame Judith recommended that we create this role, building safety manager. It's not there per se. The actual text that was in there regarding that specific title is removed, but there are still requirements for people to manage buildings to keep them safe. Government was worried about over cautious building safety managers costing residents too much money as we entered a cost of living crisis. And the other one is that the personal evacuation plans is not, PEEPs has been removed from it, which we think is, we've said in the past was a controversial step. So DLUC gave us this slide when we started talking about Building Safety Bill as it was, Building Safety Act as it became. And it's always useful just to come back to this and say, well, we remind ourselves where we are within this process. So the bill has received royal assent and become law. So that's the second box down. So where we are now is in these three boxes here, working on the secondary legislation that's necessary to enact all the things. So the Building Safety Act gives Secretary of State powers to do stuff, but what it doesn't necessarily do is actually write the regulations per se. And so what we're now seeing is a series of formal consultations on secondary legislation, which there's they write a draft regulation, run a consultation on it, publish the consultation response and amend the draft accordingly. We get the regulation through Parliament. So we're at this stage here, and there's various different pieces of secondary legislation needed. Government also gave us this slide as a list of things that things that we could expect to happen over the coming period. And bear in mind, this here is Royal Assent. So the first thing was 2 months after Royal Assent, we were going to extend the limitation period of the Defective Premises Act. That happened. Then there was a series of actions to happen at 12 months, which was April this year, and a series of actions that were supposed to happen at 18 months. So that's coming in October. So let's look at those two in more detail. So we're expecting at 12 months, we were expecting the building safety regulator to set up a residents panel to do the stuff on residents' voice. Done that. That's now up and running. The regulatory forum fire safety changes, that was meant to happen by April. Well, we just said that went live as part of in England in January, 23rd of January. The Architects Registration Board powers being strengthened. I'll be honest, I don't know whether that's happened or not. I'm not an architect, and if we've got any architects in the room that can tell us whether that's happened, I'd appreciate it. The important one for me here is this construction products, additional powers for the regulation of construction products, and at the moment that's not happening. That's being delayed. If we then look at the actions for 18 months, and the actions for 18 months, Building Advisory Committee, that's up and running already. So again, a lot of what was being done under Building Regulations Advisory BRAC, which was done for DLUC, has now transferred over to HSE. A number of people have transferred from working in DLUC team to a HSE team, so that HSE's taken on responsibility for the approved documents. That's all up and running ahead. The Industry Competence Committee, HSE had set up an interim Industry Competence Committee. That's an industry it's now being rolled over because the HSE is in place as a full formal Industry Competence Committee. That's up and running, and that's interviewing new members now as we speak. We're waiting to hear back about that. Mandatory registration of building inspectors and building control approvers is going through, and building control people have that system is going to come out in the next few weeks, and we expect that's already underway, as is the mandatory registration of occupied high-rise resi buildings. That one, HSE ran a building safety regulators conference in March, and there's a system now, a digital system, where you have until October to register your building, and if you're responsible for a high-risk residential building, you should be looking at that system. You should be talking to HSE, looking at that system and registering it. An awful lot of people have done. There was a lot of interest in that at the conference. Because when we get to October, there will be new duties on the accountable person on how they manage their building safety risks. And that comes along with the fact that the first part of that is to register the damn thing. So we see that. The mandatory occurrence reporting and gateways 2 and 3 is an interesting one. We kind of know they're coming. We know they're there. What we haven't seen yet for these is the secondary legislation. And that's the same for the last one, the construction products stuff. What we are told, what we've very recently been told in the last week or so, is that all this secondary legislation is coming out. It is going to come out draft in July, and that will be able and will go through and will come live in October. I didn't think that was going to be possible for the construction product stuff, but gateways 2 and 3 we are expecting to go live still expecting to go live in October, even though the secondary legislation is only going to be coming out at some stage next month. So we're going to obviously look into that, and there might be some new stuff next time round. The other one that's on there, golden thread of information. golden thread of information will be part of it ties in nicely with Gateway 3, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we go through Pres. But we are looking to see whether how that comes out. They've already run a consultation on golden thread and fed back information on that. So government has done this. So we have an idea what government wants, and there's information available, and we'll talk about that. So that means Building Safety Act, the regulator. So we know that HSE is our new regulator. They've now lost their shadow regulator tag. They are the full and formal regulator of building safety. They launched this at a conference in March. And the strap line for what they're interested in, somebody come up with from shed to shard. So they're interested in everything in some way, shape or form. They are interested, obviously, in the regulatory regime and the gateways for high risk buildings, but the competency stuff they're doing and the safety and performance stuff they're doing applies to all buildings. So they're going to get involved because they're involved in setting the building regulations and all the guidance that comes with that. And they're involved they'll be involved in promoting competence and the competence for all buildings. But it's probably the biggest thing we're going to be seeing, and the biggest impact they're going to have is in the gateways and this regulatory regime for high risk buildings. And what does that look like? And I hope you've seen the picture bit of this before. We know that Gateway 1 which is planning, is now active, and we're expecting the secondary legislation in July, as we've said, for Gateways 2 and 3. And so what do we expect by that? So Gateway 1 looks at the fire strategy for the building. It gives you and deals with the planning and its permission to design. And when Gateway 1 went live, there were a lot of buildings got rejected over things like inadequate number of staircases, over things like fire and rescue access. And there were a massive number of buildings that were rejected, and even rejected on second submission. But we're starting to see that as people have got used to this new Gateway 1 system, those numbers are starting to come down. And so people are getting used to Gateway 1. The worry is Gateways 2 and 3. Okay, Gateway 2 is, according to the HSE at the conference in March, will require full plans. Okay, and so there's a worry about that, about how that means we can't necessarily go on and do what we do in terms of currently in terms of contractor design portion, where it's design and build, or which is almost more design as you build type approach. And Gateway, so with more design work to get to Gateway 2, permission to construct, and then Gateway 3 is completion stage, which is, have you actually constructed what you've done, permission to occupy. It's worth stressing, however, in spite of all this, that what the gateways don't do is change the fundamental legal requirement to build a safe building. A building that is a safe building built today will be the same as a building that's a safe building built under Gateway once it's gone through Gateways 2 and 3. The legal requirements to how you ensure that building is safe remains the same. It's just that Gateway 2 especially, and Gateway, to a certain extent, lesser extent, Gateway 3 will require a greater deal of regulatory scrutiny. Gateway 2, you're going to have to design it earlier and design it more rigorously than we may do at the moment. And Gateway 3, once you've done that, your construction is going to be checked against what you designed. Which is a bit of a worry, I suppose, because you are going to see more dialogue. And one of the concerns with Gateway 3 has been that if we change a design in the midst of construction, you're supposed to stop and go back to HSE if it's a major change. And so there's concerns within tier 1 community, within principal contractor community, that we're going to have to design it more and design it earlier, and then we're going to have to make sure as we change things as we go through, that's going to cause delays as well. So that takes me nicely and neatly to poll question 2, I believe. Okay. What we got? So lots of people not concerned because they're not necessarily relevant to them. Fair enough. If you are concerned with the gateways for another reason, please stick some points in the chat for us. I'll be intrigued to know what that is. I'm worried that 22% were not aware of the gateways, because this has been flagged well ever since building a safer future. That mentioned them. All right. Okay. One of the key things that will come out of this in terms of the gateways, in terms of the gateways going forwards, is gateways linked into golden thread. Okay, plan your building and we are going to have to keep records of what we're doing going forwards. And there's this term that keeps getting bandied around, golden thread. Okay, and it's a record of building information as we go forwards. Government ran a consultation in autumn last year and has fed back information on that. Have a look at that. Basically, a lot of this now legally will end up being on the client. So there's an onus on you as a building owner, if you're a building owner, build asset owner of one of these sorts of things, to collate and make sure that the golden thread is collated and submitted. Okay, you will need to do stuff as the building is constructed, and you will need to do stuff as the building is occupied and maintained with the golden thread. And legally, a lot of that ends up on the client. HSE has recently published the start of some guidance on this, and so you can. There's I often talk about the HSE do a monthly newsletter, the building safety team at HSE. This was taken. They published this again in March, around the time of the Building Safety Regulator Conference, and there's a web page on HSE that give you information about golden thread in terms of what detail you will need to store during design and construction, what detail you need to store during occupation. And there's also a link on there to what the government's information of golden thread. But basically, you need to have your information securely, digitally, and it's meant to be the source of truth as to what's in the building. And it should be available to people who come to work on your building at a later stage and maintain it. Okay, so it needs to be easy to access. One of the challenges with this really going forwards is that we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to work out how to source this and how to store this, and the level of detail that's necessary for this. So we're worried that and Dame Judith Hackett, while we were up, those of you who were at FireX or around while we were at FireX doing what we were doing, across the hall there was a digital construction conference, and Dame Judith stood and did a a speech where she said, look, it's a good idea this, but I'm worried that diverse digital systems are going to make this difficult to achieve. So that sort of thing highlights the need for an inspection code of practice that covers the sort of level of detail and how it's stored and the competence of people and how it's all done. And one of the things we're going to do, as you'll see later, is we're going to try and put a team together to draft something, sort of a guide and a code of practice on how that would best work for the passive fire industry. There is to be a mandatory occurrence reporting system for safety events, which is going to be ultimately run and set up by the regulator. That's meant to be coming in October. We already see that the sort of the voluntary one, Cross, has started to look at fire, and we've seen and they've started to do passive fire probably in the last 12 months, and we've seen a couple of interesting cases about two-sided walls exposed to fire, and or something about specification of intumescent coatings, and there's been a couple of cases there. But ultimately HSE will be running a system looking at mandatory recurrence, about what would happen, and discussing things where there's a risk of significant death or injury. So we shall see that. We wait for that system to come up and running in the next few months. Beyond that, construction product regulation provisions. We know we're tucked away at the end of the Building Safety Act, and our Secretary of State's given lots of powers to make regulations. It's how he uses them. There was some secondary legislation published on the government website in 2021, which was taken off about 10 months ago, and we're still waiting the next iteration. I'm told it could be as soon as next month, but I'm not holding my breath. It's worth mentioning that the Building Safety Act still contains, as passed, the provision for Secretary of State to make regulations for safety critical products. So what I'm doing now, what we talk about for the rest of this section on construction products, that's considering the fact that we've not heard or otherwise that this is going to be abandoned. We still expect safety critical products to come about, and we still expect that to affect us in a big way. We have a new construction products regulator. OPSS is set up and running. They've been up and running on this now for about 12 months. As ASFP, we've met OPSS because they've started working in 6 key product areas, all things related to items that may or may not have worked as well as expected at Grenfell: doors, cladding, insulation. And one of the systems they've been looking at is smoke control. And we've met with a number of members of TG6 and OPSS about the smoke control stuff. And I've met with the OPSS team a couple of times since. So they're already looking into that, and they are talking about this. Okay. But probably the biggest single thing on construction products that's changed since we last did one of these webinars is the fact that the Morel report, the long-awaited Morel report, was finally published in mid-April. So this document, Testing for a Safer Future, was published. There were a series of government consultations on construction product testing that were meetings held in summer 2021 with the review panel, Paul Morel and Annalise Day. They went away and, based upon that thinking, wrote a report, and that report is based upon, say, what we talked about with them back then. I don't think it's changed much since. There's a lot of things in there we already knew. There's a load of recommendations. probably 20 headline topics, and then 80, and then if you go into each of the, there's 3 or 4 sub recommendations, which gives you about 80 sub recommendations in total. Many for government, some for a UCAS and industry, and we'll talk about what those recommendations are. But before we go further, I thought I'd ask you, have you read it? Have you read the 174-page Morale report? And sorry, and can I just say, can I also say thanks for that feedback on the Architect Registration Board information. That's useful. That it's not something I get exposed to overly much. So super. Thanks a lot for that comment. And there we go. And there you go. So half of you are not aware of the Morale report, and 96% of you haven't read it. I'm glad that 5% of you did read it as when it came out. I'll be honest, it doesn't tell you much. It tells you lots of it. It's long. If you're looking for a magic golden bullet, there isn't necessarily one in there. There's lots of things that we know. So, report came out mid-April. Makes a number of points. It mentions, one of the key things it mentions is that our construction product regulations are currently written around European CPR, and European CPR is not necessarily a thing that's there for product safety. It's a system that was enable free trade, so that a construction product manufacturer in Spain could test in France and sell in Germany, and that there would be common technical things talked about across all of Europe. Okay, it says the report mentions a failure of market surveillance and no enforcement. We kind of know that, because there's no European country, or next to no European country, has ever brought cases on construction product construction product surveillance and enforcement, because it's a very complicated subject that trading standards equivalents, it's too complicated for them, and they don't tend to get involved. It mentions there's no comprehensive listing of failed products, which is a bit of a concern, because it's that would be a very difficult thing to do. But there are other recommendations in there of how to get around that, and we'll talk about that. Too many ABCP systems, and it's too complex a process. ABCP is attestation and verification of constancy of performance. So in other words, it's a fancy European acronym for the tasks that between you and the conformity assessment body proves that the product remains the same and the product should deliver the performance it should. But there are too many systems, and it's too complicated a process. You know, and we at the moment this ties into the European system, so we see CE marks, and not all CE marks are equal. Some CE marks come from the fact that, like with a lot of passive fire systems, that the products have been third-party tested, that third-party testing has been third-party assessed, and there is quality control done and set up between both the manufacturer and the conformity assessment body. However, for that's why that is. But conversely, there are some CE marks that just come from products where the manufacturer says yes, it's fine, CE mark. And that's, so not all CE marks are equal. Many passive fire protection products and systems are not covered by harmonized European standards, HENS, or designated British standards, and therefore they're not, the marking of them is not mandatory. It's a voluntary scheme. Okay, so because of that, we're dealing with not all things are equal. Okay, the comment there's a lot of things. I apologize, there are a lot of 3 and 4 letter mnemonics on those. Hopefully I've explained them all to you. CPR, construction products regulations, AVCP, attestation, verification, quantity, performance, QC by another word, harmonised ENs, designated British standards. Okay, so recommendations for this is a series of recommendations in there. There's not many for us in industry, but what there is, here they are. We should work with government to simplify AVCP and increase the rigour by which we do attestation of constancy of performance. We in industry should be writing guides on AVCP systems. We should be working to devise certificates with our cert bodies, to devise somewhere where there is a document from the certification body, the assessment body, in support of declaration of performance, so that there's a standard set of documents that don't all come from the manufacturer evidencing performance. More info from industry will need to give more information to the laboratories when booking a test. Have you tested this before? Have you tried this before? If you tried this before, what have you changed? And are you going to try this somewhere else and try and do this somewhere else, to avoid people sort of shopping around for tests and things like that? We need to review requirements for modern methods of construction with government, adopt and promote CCPI code for construction product information, and we'll talk a bit about that. It's the last slide. Labelling and traceability frameworks, golden thread standards, and then the last two were that we as trade associations need to work to promote compliance from our members with all the regulations, and that ultimately trade associations and industry need to come together to take leadership in areas where it's not controlled by law, it's not regulatory, and make sure those are delivered. Beyond that, Paul also requested that, and this is a lot of these regulatory and legislative proposals were written around stuff that's happened, and some of this is all written around stuff that was proposed in October 21. Some of this, as you can see, new regulator, OPSS, we've already talked about. Results are, he says, one of the things he said was, your results are too complicated to understand. Maybe we should simplify using classification statements. Now, I've previously railed a bit against classification because of the bureaucracy that brings us to about two, but it's a really powerful argument, that so maybe we need to look at classification and look at how we use classification and how we get round the other issues where we can't classify because it's not covered. There's a legal requirement for manufacturers to share information with the regulator. That's going to come in the powers for OPSS. And he was suggesting, a lot of what he was suggesting was that manufacturers provide declaration of performance, and a lot of this is his recommendations are using the provisions within the European system, but to the existing European based system, but to use those to ensure product safety rather than just free market access. Lots more recommendations came up, however, landed on government. Bring other families into the safety critical, designated British standards. Let's have new designated British standards. One of his suggestions was to allow BSI freedom from SENS rules, SENS standstill, to allow them to write their own standards. We don't know whether that will happen. And set minimum standards for voluntary third-party certification schemes. Don't know whether that will apply to us though. And so lots of things in terms of how these systems would operate, and there's an awful lot of stuff in there. I think the biggest one on this particular lists on this particular sheet is the fact that he wants to drive the levels of AVCP up and increase the rigor within AVCP. So for safety critical stuff, he wants us to use System 1+, and that system is never used around Europe at the moment. That's a system whereby the laboratory does the assessment, the laboratory does all the testing, produces the assessment, And System 1 Plus, the laboratory goes back and checks at a regular occasion by dint of testing that the product performance remains the same. So it has an annual audit test or an audit test in there of performance on a regular basis. And that's probably one of the biggest things. So it will drive up the amount of involvement of conformity assessment bodies in doing that sort of task. I hope many of you will have seen this before, and this is a reminder. We're still expecting this to be the same. Well, there's a couple of questions that fall out about this. So, if you look at this particular slide, the left-hand box is government suggests we're going to bring out a general product safety requirement. It's a repurpose of an existing piece of consumer legislation in terms of making construction products safe before they're put on the market. It means manufacturers will need to run risk assessments to prove they've considered all the likely risks that could come from the use of that and steps to mitigate it and given advice to mitigate it. And there's a document, I think, PAS 7050 that BSI have published that gives you an idea of how realistically you can do that. On the right-hand box, it says maintaining the existing regulatory approach for projects subject to a designated standard or harmonized EN standard as was. And in our world, that's dampers. So dampers have a mandatory product standard. We have to CE mark them, ultimately UKCA mark them, and that will continue. Whether government is going to take some of those products within the existing regulatory approach, for instance, gypsum board to EN 520, and increase the level of ABCP required from the current System 3 up to a System 1 or even 1 Plus, that we don't know. We're still waiting to find out how that will work, or otherwise. There's a level of potential divergence from Europe. In the middle, we have the rest of the block, stuff that at the moment you don't necessarily have to CE mark, UKCA mark under UK construction products regulations. They're this stuff that goes onto this statutory list of safety critical products. We have to write a new product standard that you must use to mark and get your product tested and assessed within that regime. That's where the vast majority of our product systems are going to end. Okay, safety critical, and that's what we're keeping an eye on. Okay, right, that's that. Canter through these next few until we can have a few 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes for Q&A at the end of it. Regarding removal of BS 476 national classifications from ADB, it was one of 4 things in that consultation. It's not been necessarily asked for in Morel or anywhere else, but it's been a general direction of travel that we've been headed on. Is there a sound scientific basis for this? That's an interesting comment. The consultation was heavily commented on. Now, we know that at the moment government's looking at, is having to look and consider the 2 staircase question, which was one of the 4 things. And they're currently considering that. And that's their first one, because we know there's a number of projects being held up whilst they resolve that. So we've no idea when we'll see a formal response to that. Government have said they will. We're waiting to see that. Okay. While we're at it, probably since I last did one of these, what does the certification for space in terms of CE marking and UKCA marking? Government policy is now to end CE marking and switch to UKCA as of the 30th of June 2025 for construction products. Interestingly, if you're in curtain world, active curtain world, the machinery directive CE mark ends the 31st of December 2024. So there's different things yet. We are awaiting the secondary legislation to make this happen. You will remember we were publishing lots of information about this as we got through to the thing going forwards. That takes me into competence. So we'll topic of competence. Lots of people have published lots of information about competence, and the fact that Building a Safer Future said you need to improve competence in the general construction industry and the specialist construction industry, and demonstrate how you maintain that competence. And there's been lots of different guides and documents published. We've got BSI Public gave us PAS 8670, the core criteria for competence frameworks. They produced 3 further documents, 867123, on competence for principal designer, principal contractor, and building safety management people. And having done all that, they're now, in July, they're going to review 8670 again and see where that gets us. Industry response group set up 12 groups looking at competence in different areas. Working group 2 has been looking at competence of installers. Working group 12 has been looking at the competence of those handling construction products. And working group 12 produced a white paper which on the competence levels. And so what we've done is we've taken all that lot and we've tried to mold it in everything that we can, and everything that where there's competence requirements, and mold it into one framework. But before we do that, let's ask a question. Have you begun to put steps in place? Okay, so have we got steps in place to demonstrate the competence of those in your organization? And 63% have started, 24% thinking about it, and 15% saying no. Excellent. Okay, glad you've all started. Right, we've been thinking about it lots, and I'm going to share with you, could take you through share with you a bit of what we've been doing. So one of the things that we've been looking at here is how competence, how an installer company might demonstrate competence, right? And the installer company has individuals, and the installer company, the organization here, is responsible for ensuring that its individuals are competent and making sure that it has competent individuals, and it's assessing those individuals for their competence. We have a third-party certification body who is certifying the performance of that organization, is looking at that, and then UCAS is looking at the performance of the certification body and how they do it. So what ASFP are looking to do is, in the first part of this particular thing, is set standards and increase standards for what the certification bodies are doing whilst they are certifying installers for their organizational and individual competence of their employees. Okay, and so we're strengthening criteria. We're writing a new series of new scheme standard by which strengthens criteria for how many times the installer organization is specified, drives the use of certified products where applicable, and delivers a common approach to the organization determining the competence of its individuals. Okay, and so that's the first part of this scheme, is a set of rules for the certification body. And what that will look like is an ASFP quality mark, which we will be giving. So we will write this series of scheme rules by which the certification bodies run certification schemes as a set of minimum standards. And it's intended to support the competency framework. And we've been talking to the certification bodies within CertTG as to what that's going to look like. So that's the first part of the thing. The second part of the thing, then, of our competency pathway is to look at the individual and how we demonstrate and prove competence of the individual. which in effect is two parts. First of all, define competence, and secondly, demonstrate, work out how you then demonstrate that you've met those definitions. And we've been looking across the map of all these different tasks and roles that you see on the screen in front of you across the contractual chain, from start at design and specification, buying, somebody selling and distribution, installing, all the way through to own and occupy. And we've got 5 different levels of competence within their experience competence, from a foundation, somebody that's very versed, just starting, to authoritative, somebody that can write the rules. And that 5-level approach links in with what's in the IRG 12 Working Group 12 white paper. But it doesn't necessarily mean that for everything you need 5 levels. Okay, because for instance, you aren't going to have a foundation level person who's doing the design of passive fire protection. That they're probably going to be in somebody who's doing design work and product assessment work is probably going to be in the bottom 3 levels, whereas somebody working in a warehouse is probably going to be in the top 3 levels at most, possibly even only the top 2 levels. So we look at that, considering tasks and activities and the levels concerned. We've got about 140 different task, experience, activity combinations that we've come out with. And for each of those 140, we've set about writing a super impressor spreadsheet, considering skill statements, what skills, what knowledge, what experience, and what behavior those 140 different people doing those 140 different activity and skill experience levels need to being able to show that they are capable of working at that, in that task at that level. And that we're pulling on existing stuff as well. So we're pulling on existing training and qualifications, existing mechanisms of professional registration, recognize third-party ASF, our own training, any other third-party training that we recognize, plus of course from a manufacturer's and an installer standpoint, records of experience, demonstrations of behavior, that stuff that's employer declaration against agreed standards. And what we're working on at the moment is going to be a web-based system whereby individuals will be able to declare their skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors against a set of criteria for a particular job role, for a particular function, for a particular level of experience, and that will be there. And what we'll be working with installer organizations to ensure that they're using this system to look after their people and to help their people, and the certification bodies will be expecting to use this to see the installers organization using this and monitoring this as part of their checks. So it's sort of it all flows down and it all flows through to give an overall picture of competence. Okay. One last slide before we get to the end. Just as an add-on, I mentioned this a couple of times. Code for Construction Product Information, CCPI, which was set up and run by a company called CPIL, which is an organisation set up by the Construction Products Association. Dame Judith Hackett, in Building a Safer Future, said you need better ways of proving that construction product information is correct and valid and accurate. Paul Morell, in his report, pushes this. There's been favourable reviews from other places, including Dame Judith Hackett. Now, it's been dormant for a while. They set it up and launched in a blaze of publicity about 18 months ago, and then ran into problems with professional indemnity insurance, but they're back up and running. And the first wave of applications is starting, and I'm sure that in effect, if you're working for a manufacturer, you should be engaging with these people. It will be, I think it will become a de facto thing. It's a code of information for those of you who develop and publish construction products information, and that's what you should be doing. we know that construction CPL have appointed a number of reviewers to do the reviews necessary to give the approvals. We have a bit of a concern about their ability to deal with the workload, because I think they've appointed about 10, and 10 people to review all construction product information and processes and procedures is a lot. They have got somebody, as I'm aware, that's got passive fire protection experience, so that's good. So we're keeping an eye on that. They will be doing a webinar at some point in the near future. Please sign up for it and get involved if you work for a manufacturer. So look, this is the gateway. The biggest things that we see coming forwards will be some new construction products regulations. That's going to have a big challenge on manufacturers. There's going to be gateways 2 and 3, and we see secondary legislation coming out in July for implementation in October. That's going to be massive for contractors and installers. We're going to have to design things better. We have to design it simpler and more thoroughly. And we're going to have to construct what was designed, not necessarily change. Otherwise, Gateway 3 is going to be a nightmare. And we're going to have to record and keep records and whatever to maintain things better in place. So there is going to be a big change coming. You can see you can see it now. October, July, October could be massive. The next time I do one of these, it could be completely different, with all sorts of new stuff, because these things that take place. And at that, I'm going to say questions and answers. And there's a few questions on the screen. So, right. So just looking at these, thanks very much for the questions. And if you've got any, stick them in. If you've got any, stick them in the thing. I'll do about 5 minutes, and then we'll call it quits. Thanks for the comment on the Architects Act and Architects Registration Board. That's really useful. Too many 3- and 4-letter mnemonics. Hopefully, I tried to deal with those as we went through by explaining them. But if not, there is a glossary of these things on the ASFP website. So have a look at that. With certified products, what level and standard of contractor is required for installation? Do they have to be third-party? It's a third-party accredited, third-party certified. At the moment, no, they don't. There's no legal imperative, no legal requirement. And the requirements that are written in there come out of what's in approved document 7. So as of today, they don't have to be. What we are trying, obviously, what we in ASFP are trying to do is increase the level of competence of our members, and so that if you're happy when you pick a local get a contractor, that they are capable of doing what they're doing, and that's you doing the best bit of your taking the best steps to meet your requirements under AD7. So that's that. If we struggle to find contractors that are certified, what level do they need to be at to hang a certified fire door? And say that's the same comment. And will competence standards be mandatory for local tradespersons? At the moment, our competence standards will be mandatory for ASFP members. What we're actually doing is we're also talking to HSE and working with HSE on a series of standards, which may or may not be relevant for trades, for electricians, for plumbers and things like that, in terms of what they do, and to identify, and we're trying to work on that. But that's conversation only started last week, so that's a new thing for us in terms of that, because there is a series, there's a sort of a competent person scheme signed up in that sort of area, but it covers a really small, it will only cover really small things. I mean, I would look at say there's if I take the example of fire stopping, there's what do we do if an electrician's coming in and running a cable through a fire rated partition, or fitting a single socket, to complex it's going to have to go through a complex multi-service penetration. How do you deal with that? And certainly an electrician's not capable of dealing with the latter case, they are dealing with the first case, if properly trained, you know, it's it sort of give them a series of rules that say you can do this and here's how you get around it, but you can't, if it's beyond that, you need to get advice. And so that's how I would be dealing with that. Right, next question, would manufacturer for products fall under the design and specify part of this competence map if they are providing guidance to others? Yes, they would. For manufacturer of products, there's stuff on design and specification if providing guidance, and there's also stuff for manufacturers in terms of those people who are writing, commissioning and publishing and giving product information out into the market, which so that the guidance that's in our competence frameworks ties in with requirements for CCPI. So there's both design and specification, and anyone that's communicating construction product information, performance information out there. Can we get a copy of this beautiful presentation? Our standard thing is to say to people that we record these and we will be putting this up on the ASFP website as a video you can watch. You'll get a link to that. Don't tend to circulate the presentations per se. Sorry. And we'll do a couple more and then we're done. Are members aware that they will all be duty holders under the Building Safety Act on all projects, not just high risk buildings? Yes, I mean, we'll all be. A lot of this, although the regulatory framework covers, and the gateways covers the high risk buildings, the performance of materials, the legal framework, the legal requirements that we've said, that applies to all buildings going for, still applies to all buildings. So please be aware of that. Okay. Do you think BS 476 will go as we test for this using column encasements? My initial feeling has been that 476 will possibly go, will probably go, but I can't necessarily guarantee it. Government's still considering, from our standpoint, I think most of our markets are currently use BSEN tests going forwards, and there are BSEN tests that can be used. The industry with the biggest negative reaction to the end of 476 is the fire door industry. They're the ones sort of most entrenched in 476. And then the last one, demonstrating competency any time for rollout, what quals will be accepted, etc. At the moment, I don't know what that timeline is. We are going to be putting the first tranche of stuff out for consultation around some of our members and around the relevant TGs in the coming weeks, probably in the next few weeks. We're sort of like explaining what this is and how it works. I would imagine that rollout's going to be it's going to be a long and slow process, probably over the next couple of years. Right, and that's it. Thank you very much. Quick couple of parish notices. We are doing a seminar in Scotland. I think it's in Stirling on Wednesday the 19th of July, looking at competence, compliance and culture. And there's various speakers for that, including how and looking at how Scotland compares to England and compares to Ireland, and what was going to happen. And then our next seminar in England, we're back at the Aviva building in London on Wednesday the 13th of September. Tickets for both events are available on the ASFP website at the moment. Hoping to get a number of good external speakers for that September seminar, and we'll be putting information out once we've got everything confirmed. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. I hope that was of use, and look forward to seeing you at some point in the near future on one of these or at one of our seminars. See you all soon.